I remember I'd just come back from Charlottesville, Virginia, where I grew up, and I had played a couple of years of rugby there, but mostly just on the C teams or B teams, but enough to learn to play the game. And we'd become pretty disappointed with flag football at the law school. A bunch of us had previously been playing football in college. Were a little disappointed with the flag football situation. So I brought this rugby ball to my close friend then, Rick Mellon.
You know, we ran up and down the athletic fields here a couple of times, and lo and behold, here comes one guy, two guys, three guys, and you know, their interest was keen too. I mean, we didn't have to sit there and wheedle or cajole anybody to get interested in rugby. For some reason or the other, some of them had some previous experience, but I don't think most of them had.
Most of them were grad students. That was my recollection.
Well, some of them were, but you know, as it turned out ultimately, and I don't remember other than Gary, I don't remember who joined us that first day. We got Sonny, he was not a grad student.
That's right, that's true.
There were, I think ultimately it turned out to be a, you know, kind of a 60-40 mix, but that was the ultimate side, not the one that came out of the crowd and clustered around us that first day. But I mean, they saw whatever I saw in this oblate spheroid, and you know, we started pitching it around, and I don't know, I can't remember whether I don't think we did any tackling that day, but we you know, we did 3/4 lines and ran up and down the athletic field here, and pitching the ball back and forth, and a couple of more people would get interested, and so on and so forth. It was a nice, beautiful day. So in terms of its being, you know, a good setting, it wasn't blisteringly hot, but it was a cloudless, warm, beautiful early fall day, and everything was set just right, and for some reason or the other, like we said, it clicked.
And I had no thoughts of starting a team here. I was just trying to show my friend Rick, you know, how my misspent youth had been, and he was the grand organizer. He took it and just started doing research on the game and where it came from, and he got together with a fellow in the intramural department, I think, here, and they became intrigued and said they would add some financial support behind it, and started publicizing it, and to my total astonishment, people showed up.
we had a couple of booths at the student fair or whatever it was called, and you know, it got a real good response out of that, and you know, I mean, it was just it was exciting, and it was extremely over the top as far as what we had expected at the outset. I mean, Jim and I didn't come down with the idea of doing anything, at least I didn't, other than just pitching the rugby ball back and forth. So, but you know, there in the space of like 6 weeks or 2 months, we had our first match scheduled with Huntsville Redstone Arsenal team, and away we went. The first game we didn't have these jerseys. We had jerseys that I went over and bought at the Student Union building that were,
I wondered where those came from.
Yeah, they were orange, and in that regard I suppose they were acceptable, but they didn't have the white collar, so you know, we were definitely outclassed by the Huntsville, but we beat them. In terms of dress, we were outclassed. But by our second match, we had these very jerseys, and we were ready to go.
Yeah, it was amazing. I didn't think we could possibly field a team, and then when we fielded the team, I was stunned at how well we did. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact we had two fellows come out who were good coaches, who knew how the game was really played, and they had played or coached in, I guess, England. And so they began to really show us rugby skills, and really elevated our level of knowledge of the game, I think. And then I guess the second year we had a fellow from second season, I guess, yeah, a fellow from South Africa who was a very tough individual, and he turned us into a real team that was well conditioned and well coached, and so we owe a lot to them, I think.
He was a Knoxville lawyer named Phil Durand, and he had actually coached the national side for Malawi, which was one of those countries within South Africa, one of those tribal nations. And yeah, he had, and he was fabulous too. The original coach was a chemistry professor named Dr. John Bloor, and then Phil Durand came along in the spring. The side we put together was somehow or the other, it all gelled, and we had strong, talented, if not overeducated in terms of rugby, people at every position. And the dedication of these guys to come out, day after day, week after week, was just fierce. And to give you some idea of the way we felt about our team and the discipline and the esprit, story comes to mind during one match when we were at a critical point in the match. I think we were slightly ahead, but the other team seemed to be surging, and there's this loose scrum out on the pitch, and all of a sudden the ball goes into touch, so the play kind of stops, and one of our leading players, a wing forward, comes bolting out of this loose scrum, and he's clapped his hand to his mouth, and there's blood coursing down, the front of his jersey and through his fingers and all. And we look at each other like, what? This guy, he's one of our key players. What are we going to do here? And he goes running off the pitch up to his girlfriend. His girlfriend stands up and leans toward him, out to embrace him, to say, "Oh, poor Charlie." Charlie grabs one of her hands and slaps his bloody hand down into her hand, and there's a tooth sitting there, and amidst all this blood, he says, "Put this on ice," and he turns around and runs back onto the pitch, and we win the match handily. It was great.
During their second year, in an effort to introduce the game to a wider audience, the rugby team held a demonstration in Neyland Stadium at halftime of the annual orange and white spring football game.
Someone was reading sort of the history of the game, and the crowd was wondering what is going on down there. And a big crowd that was there for the orange-white game, football game. And so I remember one of our players, Val Wright, broke loose on a long run. And the crowd all screamed like crazy, and just as an experiment, I yelled as loud as I could, and I could not hear myself yell. The noise on that stadium floor was so loud. One match, we were a man short, and we had Kurt Watson, who was the former All-SEC running back for Tennessee, play as our wing man. And after the game, he said he thought there was nothing worse than bad blocking, but now he knows there's no blocking is even worse.
It's probably fitting that Tennessee rugby started during the turbulence of the early 70s. After all, it's a turbulent sport. But in spite of the upheaval in the country, and certainly on college campuses across the country, the rugby pitch seemed to be the one place where social and political issues could be put aside.
Almost everybody that was into undergraduate school had very, very long hair, dressed in the bell-bottoms, tie-dyed T-shirts, and if we had ever stopped to think about it, which I don't think we did, there would probably been a real disparity in our views about politics and social issues, because those things were extremely significant at the time. I mean, the university often almost came to a standstill over this protest or that protest, or a strike or whatever. And those kind of things were very, very prevalent and rampant on campus. And the newspaper was extremely anti-administration for the most part, administration of the university, anti-Nixon, so on and so forth. But I do not, Frank, I don't remember a single time that there was ever an issue like that that caused any dissension or division within our side, our team. Those things, they just had no relevance. And I couldn't tell you what Val Rich or what Gary Gelino or Charlie King or Mike Stellis, I mean, I couldn't tell you what their politics are because those things vanished. We went on the pitch, they were dead gone. And where you think they might surface is in the parties that we used to have after the matches. Never. There was never any anger or dissension about anything. I mean, we were a unit.
With the auspicious start, it was time for the second wave of players that would form the foundation of the team for the most of the rest of the 70s. And for many of them, even a violent game like rugby was a welcome relief from what they'd already seen.
I was in Vietnam. I came back and I was just happy to be alive, and I didn't like the war too much.
Not there in 70 or 71, but I was there in 72. And so I got to play with a lot of the guys that were on that team, on those teams in 70 and 71. I played with Phil Crithfield, Rick Watkins, Jimmy Watson, John Ragsdale, Hunter Beach, Roger Zinn, Fred Creasy, a lot of those guys. And then in 73, when I was a sophomore, those guys had graduated, and we started to see a lot of the Vietnam era people, Vietnam era veterans coming back into school through the GI Bill. So that's when we started seeing people like Bob Hampstead and Paul Hampstead, and I guess Jim Perrin might have been a part of that too. And so it was. There were some older guys with some older experience in the beginning, and there was some older guys with some more worldly experience in the sophomore and junior years that I was there.
I entered UT after 4 years in the Navy, and met some guys during that summer, and they said, "Hey, you want to play rugby?" I said, "I don't know anything about it." They said, "It doesn't matter." So my freshman year, fall of 73, I started playing rugby for the University of Tennessee.
Bobby says he's in Vietnam, but he's on a boat. Rugby was a way for me to get out my aggressions. If you fought somebody, then they could put you in jail. But playing rugby, no jail.
It was in its third year, and I think it was a period of transition. The first couple of years, people were just satisfied about fielding a team and just making their commitments to other teams. But then the people I was involved with in the early 70s started dreaming about other goals and just trying to make the program better overall. Some of the top players and the top administrators were like Richard Sexton. At the time, Val Rich, the scrum half, was real involved.
Val, he had a really good game. He was a smart boy. Bob Bogan, Hampstead, Yamaha, let's see, Miller.
College rugby, back when I played, I'll have to admit I was in it as much for the socializing and the craziness that goes on as I was the actual game.
I think the teams in the 70s, I think there were guys that really enjoyed playing, and I mean, loved to play. I mean, they every weekend they were ready to go, I was watching some of the comments that some of the older players made about, getting beat up and everything like that. It kind of made me laugh because, we would go on a Saturday and play an A game and usually had to fill in for the B game. And then on a Sunday, we would go somewhere else and play. So we would play 3 games on a weekend. And, by Sunday night or Monday morning, you were lucky to be able to crawl out of the bed. But there on Tuesday, we were back at practice, or Thursday, we were back at practice. And we just, I don't know, we just loved it.
Yamaha was 0 or 60. And most of it was 60. He didn't slow down, you know, he was one of the most gung-ho rugby players that I know.
I played rugby here at the University of Tennessee from 1973 to 1977. I was elected captain in 1975 because I had played a year in England in high school. So I was elected captain, and it was quite a chore at the time, given that most of the players were actually much older than I was, and we didn't have a coach. We didn't have the luxury of having a Butch or a Marty. So we had to, the captain was the coach. So I was trying, here I was as a 19-year-old right out of high school trying to get a bunch of 24, 25, 26-year-olds to run laps and run hills at Fulton Bottom. So it was an interesting time.
In the early 70s when we were there, I guess Dr. Bloor, and there was an attorney, and I cannot think of his name, who coached those guys in 70, 71. But by 72, they weren't there that much anymore. Now, Dr. Bloor did come down to some of the practices, but he wasn't there on a consistent basis. So it was a lot of self-coaching, and you were being taught by guys that had played before about what you were supposed to do. And of course, you picked up some good habits and you picked up some bad habits.
I think what I liked the most in those days was how it didn't matter how hard you played, how hard you beat each other up in a game, you were the best of friends after the game. Anytime we traveled, we stayed with the other team. Anytime they traveled, we would host. We'd travel, I remember traveling to Birmingham. We didn't have enough players. They gave us a guy to play for us, and he played his heart out for us, even though they did beat the crap out of us. But there was just a camaraderie that I had never experienced before that I fell in love with the game.
Well, our motto was we might lose a game, but we'd never lose a party. So that's kind of where our mindset was.
Well, it was a different style. Back then, it was an embarrassment if the forward didn't join the ruck. So you basically had 16 players in every ruck, and if you had to be down, like out of breath or injured or something, and it was such an embarrassment, everybody hustled, and that cleared the field, so it was a wide open game.
But I can tell you that when I was playing for Nashville, I can clearly remember someone talking to me or telling me about the way I was pursuing a tackle. And I was listening to what they were saying, and what they were talking about, now I know, was a pursuit line to the fly half, cutting them in half, driving them out, all those things that you're taught to do. And at that time I said, what is this guy talking about? You know, it had never dawned on me. You just went, you know, you just ran as hard as you could and nailed the guy, and then, you know, took it from there. But yeah, it was a little bit wide open, and I probably would have been a better player if I'd had some real coaching, but yeah, it was fun.
Well, we didn't give up. That's the whole thing. I didn't give up, and I don't know that anybody else did. The only time I even thought about it was we went to Georgia, and those Australian guys, they were just beating the crap out of us. And I says, hell with it. I'm just going to hit somebody just as hard as I can, and I'm going to keep on doing it till the game's over. Then I'm going to drink all their beer.
Another player from those early 1970s teams would leave his mark, not just on his contemporaries, but on anyone who has pulled on the orange and white jersey since.
Richard Sexton was there when I came in 1972. I believe he had been on the 71 team, if I'm not mistaken. He was a little bit older than all of us.
Richard was just a genuine guy. He played his heart out. He was always there. He was the calming force. He was the guy that always had things together. He put together the first alumni match after I graduated. When I came back, he was the one that was organizing who's playing what, who's doing what, and all that stuff. He was just a stand-up guy that really stood for everything I believe that I like to see in rugby.
Richard was not the best rugby player that was out there. He was a good player. He was a forward. He was a very good player. But there were people that were faster, there were people that might be bigger, have better skills. Richard was an all-around person. He made sure the field was lined for every game. Fulton Bottoms, the creek that runs alongside it, would flood anytime we had more than about a half-inch of rain. We'd have to go down before practices and before games and pick up carp and throw dead carp back in, and logs and rocks and just things like that. I mean, Richard made sure we had a place to have the party.
Never were Richard's gifts for organization more on display than in 1975, when UT would host the first ever SEC rugby tournament.
And you think about, we had a program, so somebody had organized selling, advertising. All the teams got to shower in an aquatic center, eat at the presidential complex, and that's not a small deed. So he always had the eye on the future.
I've told this story before. It gives you a perspective on what Richard was like. I got into I wouldn't call it a fight. It was more of a shouting match with somebody, and Richard shoved his hand into my chest, and it was the hand of authority. It's like, be quiet, go back, sit down, and don't bother us anymore, or something like that. And I always remember that hand hitting me in the chest. And that was the serious side, and that was the authoritarian side. And then there was the playful side. We were having a party at our house one night, and he probably had a few too many to drink. And he decided he was going home, and his wife, it was actually his girlfriend at that time, became his wife, Susan, was very worried about him driving, and he just insisted he was going home, and she was all beside herself, and he got in the car and he drove off, and she was and she got in the car and she drove off, I guess going on home or something, or to see where his apartment was or whatever. And all Richard had done was drive around the lot, and he was parked over here. And once she left, he came back in, and we partied on for another hour or so. So that was the playful side of Richard Sexton,
He actually was the first one that thought of the scholarship. He wanted to do something special for a deserving player and to come up with a scholarship, because it was tough. All the money came out of our own pockets, and travel. When you're playing 10 games in a season and you're half of them are out of town, wherever, Kentucky, Fort Campbell, like I say, LSU, all over the place, that all came out of our pocket. So his feeling was that if we could come up with a scholarship, then that would help some deserving, at least one person to start with, and then we could build on it from there.
If he went on vacation, he visited other rugby clubs, and then he would come back and share the information with us. And like I said, one of his dreams was having our own fields and a city team. And actually, the city team, Knoxville's first game, Richard was working in Atlanta and played for High Country, was against High Country. Saturday, Thursday, Richard got killed in an industrial accident.
Richard Sexton gave us the model of a rugby player. He left us way too early, but he stood up for what he believed, and I don't know anybody that wouldn't say that he was one of the good ones, the really good ones.
I won't miss a chance to plug the Richard Sexton Scholarship, which we started in 1980, but that was probably one of, if not the very first scholarship for rugby players in the United States. I don't know that for a fact, but I know we were one of the earliest ones, if not the first one.
I had heard his story and about all that he did for the club, and how he was important in the founding of it, and then how his accident happened, and yeah, he's always been special to me, because I was the first scholarship winner, and it's kind of it's a nice thing to say I was the first one, but it all comes back to in a way honoring him and his memory and his importance to the club.
We didn't have the impetus at that time. There was no driving passion to really get that off the ground. And then unfortunately, as you know, a year after he graduated from college, he was killed in an industrial accident on the job. And that gave us the impetus. We had been, it was a shame that it took something like that, but that gave us the impetus, and he was the one that had thought of it, so we couldn't come up with something, really somebody more deserving. And his wife and I sat down with a couple other people, and she agreed, the university at the time, to establish an endowment, you had to come up with $10,000 in 10 years. Well, that doesn't sound like much today, but back in the 70s, 80s, that was a lot of money, and particularly for rugby players. So Susan put up part of the money and challenged the rest of the team, and we came up with pledges for the rest. And I'm happy to say that when we started our first campaign, we had about $14,000 that we got pledged, and so the university accepted it as an endowment. Today, we have about $120,000 in the actual scholarship itself in the endowment. And what we do is we give the income each year that's made on that investment. We're able to give that to worthy students. So we've given 110 scholarships now, counting this year's 2, and about $125,000. So it's starting from zero to that, I think, is quite an accomplishment.
I'll share a story with you, and I don't think Bobby Hampstead would object to what I had to say. When he called me to tell me that Richard had died in this industrial accident, he was on the phone, and if you know Bobby, he's a pretty tough guy. He started crying on the phone, and I wasn't prepared for that. And he kept on, and he finally said, I got to go, Yami. And I said, yeah, not a problem, not a problem. And I realized the impact that this man had upon Bobby Hampstead, and really then the impact he had upon me and so many others. And it's just hard. It's just hard sometimes to think about him and realize I've had all these good years, and he just didn't get a chance. So I don't know.
I'm sure he's smiling today. I'm sure he would say, that's what I wanted.
As UT Rugby moved through its first decade, the spirit of the team definitely matched the free spirit movement of the 70s.
Back in the early days, when I first came here on campus, marijuana was big. I mean, it was much bigger than it is now where it's legal. And I was probably the only person on the team, one of the only ones anyway, I don't want to incriminate anybody, but I was one of the only ones on the team, if not the only one, that didn't smoke marijuana. And we would literally sit down after practice on Thursday on Fulton Bottoms in a circle, and we would pass a joint around. And like I say, I never smoked, but I can't say I haven't inhaled. I've got lots of stories like that I could tell. Driving on one of the trips, driving a van, I was always the designated driver. And it was like the Cheech and Chong days, if you've ever seen it, where the van's just covered with smoke on the inside, and I'm literally driving with my head out the window so I can see to go down the road. But that was what made part of it fun.
There was a thing called the 24 Club, where you had to drink 24 beers in 24 hours or something like that. And a couple of the guys, Richard Bunch, said, "What kind of club is that?" He proceeded to drink 24 in 3 hours. And he was, needless to say, smashed. He rode on with Bradbury, had his head out the window, throwing up. They had a trash can that they finally, he'd filled that thing up.
Well, it was kind of a different era. For one, it was kind of a rebellious sport. I mean, rugby was kind of against the establishment, So I can remember my first rugby game, I rode with another player, and we kitted out in Knoxville, and rode all the way to Nashville in kit, and actually stopped for lunch and went in the restaurant with our kit on, So we were proud of it. And I didn't really feel strong ties to the university at that time because, like I said, we were more of a fringe, but real proud to pull it on with my teammates.
Aside from its formation in 1970, the two most significant shifts that would forever shape the history of UT Rugby would occur within a year of each other in the second half of the decade. The first, in 1977, was the arrival to Knoxville of a newly married, former loose forward with a desire to stay involved in the game and a penchant for unyielding discipline. Although he wasn't much older than some of his early players, it didn't take long for them to figure out that this new guy wasn't messing around. The party wasn't over, But now, there was someone around to control the chaos.
I joined the UT Rugby program in the fall of 1977. I had just moved to Knoxville, taking on a new job after getting married and moving from Atlanta. I was aware of UT because we had played them when I was with the Atlanta Rugby Club, and it seemed like a natural fit. I wasn't ready to get out of rugby. I had been coaching a team at Emory for about a year and a half, and it just seemed like the logical thing to do to see if I couldn't get involved with the program up here. My playing career ended before I wanted it to end. I sustained a knee injury that if I'd had a coach at the time, I probably would not have sustained the injury, but those days you just kind of went on with it. And I wasn't ready to get out of the game. The team I was with at the time, Emory, I realized needed more help on the sidelines than it did from a broken down cripple loose forward. So I started organizing practices, doing the things that I felt like we needed to do more by previous experience than by any kind of guidance, and we sort of stumbled our way into a certain amount of success, finding out very quickly that if you were in better shape than the opposition, 9 times out of 10, you were going to wind up being better off in the end. So I kind of built on that, and so when I showed up here, still was interested in being involved and seeing if I could help.
Butch brought a lot of structure. He was actually basically the 4th coach at UT. Dr. Bluer started the program with an assistant, and then we had a South African, Phil Duran, that was a lawyer, and he actually in town, and he actually played rugby in South Africa. And then we had a Green Beret from the Vietnam War who was a professor of zoology, Mel Whiteside. And all these people, their careers, they just coached for Phil Duran like a year and a half, and then his career got in the way. And then Mel Whiteside, he actually got an advancement and went to another university.
As far as learning how to work with Mel initially, it was the kind of thing where I came to him and I said, okay, I want to help, tell me what you want me to do. And I told him what my experience had been at that point, both as a player and as a coach, somewhat limited at that time. So initially I had the opportunity to start working with the forwards. That was where I stayed, had been player most of the time. And at that point in time, I think Mel probably went through some kind of an evaluation and looking and seeing, well, can we trust this guy? I didn't walk in and just take over. That didn't happen, and I wouldn't have wanted to happen that way. But eventually, he gained confidence in what I was doing, and more importantly, the players, the Bobby Hampsteads and the Bob Millers, and those guys gained confidence with Bob Bogan, John Woodcock. Those guys, okay, this guy does know what he's talking about, or at least he's got a better theory than what we're operating under at the moment. After about halfway through a less than successful season, I guess that's the way we put it, they came to me and said, you know, maybe you ought to take a little more of a hand into things. So I guess I became head coach in the spring of 1978 and inherited the side that included a mixed bag of students and then guys who had graduated from school and who were working in the real world. It wasn't a exclusively student organization at that time.
One of the key components of Butch's early teams was a smart, tough scrum half from Northern Virginia who had joined the program only a year before Butch and would play a major role in helping to navigate the major changes to come.
So originally I came to the University of Tennessee because my father was from Tennessee. He was in the military. And I had actually graduated from high school overseas in Belgium and was at an American high school. So I played all the traditional American sports, but I had seen rugby. And I had a nomination to the Air Force Academy because my father was a war veteran in Vietnam, a F-4 pilot. And I also had some offers from Tennessee to play baseball. It was a little bit odd because obviously they couldn't see me when I was overseas, but they said, come try out. And so originally I tried out for the baseball team, and a very unusual thing happened in my life. I came there, and there were a lot of people there that were better than me at the sport. So even though I had an opportunity to play on the team, I knew that I wasn't going to get a lot of playing time. And I've never been really great at sitting on the bench. So in 1976, in the fall, toward the end, there was a little beer store down toward Fulton Bottoms, and they sold Wiedemann for $1.68. So I walked down there and I bought a 6-pack of Wiedemann, and I saw rugby being played. And I went down the stairs, and it changed my life.
Danny Paris was a good athlete. He's a bit undersized, but he could make decisions quick. The really good ones, they had just that extra something, and Danny had it.
When I arrived, there were all the odd mix of characters, and it's hard when you start naming names because you'll forget people. But there was Bobby Hampstead and Moose Miller and a guy named Harry Vest and Dennis Stevens and Troy Burklow and any number of characters that I came to know. And I decided that I wanted to play the sport. So they said, sure, come on down on Tuesday. We practice here, and I did on Tuesday and Thursday. And that very next week, I played my first rugby game, not knowing anything about the sport. And we went to Birmingham, and I knew we had a number of sides that I learned were A, B, and C. And so they said, okay, well, come on down. You play on the B side or the C side. We'll get you a game. I said, great. So I showed up, and it was an early morning game, and it had rained all night long. And at that time in UT history, you never knew who was going to show up at 8 o'clock in the morning. And 14 guys showed up, and it took 15 to play. So they said, come here, son. You're now a hooker. And I said, well, that sounds great. What do I do? And they said, well, you hang between these two big guys, Moose Miller and Bobby Hampstead, and what your job is to hook the ball with your foot and push it backwards. I said, okay. And they said, but we're going to give you one piece of advice. If this thing were to hit the ground, you should keep your nose straight to the ground, because if you get your head to the side, you could break your neck. That was about 5 seconds before the game started. I said, okay. And that's pretty much everything I knew about rugby. And we got out for our first scrum, and they put me in the hooker position, and they backed off at that time about 4 feet and then came charging at each other and landed right on my spinal cord. And that kind of got my juices going. And we played for a while, and finally, like I said, the field was all covered in rain. And about 10 minutes in the game, we had a scrum, and we charged in there and hit a little awkwardly and went down, and I did as instructed, to keep my nose to the ground, and went about 3 inches underwater. So in my first rugby game, I thought I was going to drown because I didn't want to break my neck, and I was raised a rule follower. And after the game, they said, well, Danny, how'd you like that? And I said, well, I like kind of the free-flowing parts, but I ain't going to be a damn hooker anymore. And it was really kind of the ragged edge of UT Rugby. You had Val Reich, who was the scrum half, who was a heck of a competitor, and he was a tough man. And I remember Harry Vest, and he was kind of a scary character. He had, I believe, been to Vietnam and had a part of his calf blown away. It looked like a shark had bitten out of it. And he used to, every once in a while, although I didn't know what a pop kick was, he'd come rolling out and kick a pop kick, and then he'd yell his name, Harry Vest, because he wanted to know who was going to hit him, and he could hit. But he was the least scary Vest on the field because his wife was damn scary. And I had 2 young boys about halfway through my first season in '76, and they had done something wrong. I didn't see what it was, and the mom had sent them up into the woods there up the hill on Fulton Bottoms to get a switch. And they came back down and had some kind of willow brush switch, and the mom said, that ain't big enough, and she sent him back up to get another one. And I knew I didn't want to cross Harry's wife. I think Dennis Stevens was voted on the team that year most likely to carry a concealed firearm. And I remember he used to take about half a bottle of a little pint bottle of Jack Daniels before every game. But my point being that this was a pretty ragged edge bunch of guys when I started. Jim Perrin was another one. A lot of these guys were Vietnam vets on the GI Bill. And they were taking a couple classes and playing rugby. And I learned a lot about the sport. And then I came and we played in the spring of the spring of '76. And by golly, we were pretty good. We had to travel a lot, but we won pretty much most of our games, and I learned how to be a part of a really tough crew and how to play the sport and how to love it.
We played Edinburgh, Scotland, and they came as thin, pot-bellied guys that smoked cigarettes. They probably weighed 130 pounds apiece, And they partied us into the ground. We all left early. And the next day they kicked our butts. They threw us all over that field. I'll never forget the difference then between physical prowess and that football mentality of Americans to these guys who had their act together about how to play that sport. I'll never forget that. And I still remember their words in the scrum. I remember their coordination and their intensity. So here are these guys that individually were no match, in my opinion, at least in my American standards. And then on the team, on the pitch, they were unstoppable.
The second seismic shift that would alter the trajectory of UT Rugby would occur in the fall of 1980, the result of a marriage between a vision and hard practicality.
After the club was in force for about 3 years, people started looking towards the future. Richard Sexton was real prominent in that. And we had instituted the alumni dinner, each season. The old boys game in '76. We had a vision of rugby parks, visions of a city team. And so we knew sooner or later it was inevitable to have a city team. So we actually talked about it for probably about a year and a half. And I was unfortunate. I had a party injury at the end of the spring '79. So during the summer of '79, I organized the break off from UT to happen in January 1980. We did it not from pressure from the university team or from the university, but the players that were no longer students thought it was real unfair. If I've been playing 6 years, and it's hard for a freshman to come in and get playing time against somebody that's played for 6 years. So we really did it for fairness for the students.
Although the split was crucial for the overall health of rugby in Tennessee, it didn't come without some intense feelings.
I was an officer of both clubs. I was the president of Knoxville Rugby Club. I was a match secretary for UT. And we ran the Tennessee Sevens tournament in conjunction with each other for a couple of years. But what surprised a lot of it, because we started recruiting non-students, it got a situation for a few years. It was like the townies against the frats. And so the first year we got along pretty good. And the administration of both clubs always got along. But then it got a point where the players had a lot of animosity towards each other.
So as far as just general characters in rugby culture, and he was part of UT rugby culture, but he was also part of Knoxville rugby culture. Anyway, a guy named Art Reynolds.
Andy Johnson has gone all the way at quarterback. He's spinning out to the right to throw. He's being pressured. He's got enough to pass downfield, and he's intercepted, I think, or is it incomplete? It's intercepted by Tennessee's diving Art Reynolds.
Here's this big ex-UT football player that was a little bit crazy, actually a lot bit crazy. He would say crazy things, and he would do crazy things too. But two things that he would do in a pre-match situation that always made us UT guys a little bit concerned about what's going to happen next is he would take a pee on the rugby pitch, okay? So then you're thinking about where during the course of the game, you're like going, where is that pee? Then the other thing is you were, like doing your pregame introductions, saying hello to everybody. He would always say to you, don't get hurt today, And believe me, this guy could lay a lick. So he was sending a message that he's gonna come for us young bucks.
The early teams, the first team had a skill set. Those guys had been playing the game for a while. So in that regard, it was more or less, okay, fellas, I think maybe we can do this better, or I think that perhaps we want to change this technique. It really became teaching after the Knoxville side departed, because at that point in time, then we started getting guys who'd never seen a rugby ball, a lot of guys who'd never seen a rugby ball. And there weren't any coaching manuals back then that said this is the way you introduce someone to the game. So we'd start with, this is a rugby ball, it's white, it's this long, this is what you do, and every practice at the beginning of the fall and the spring, we started that process over and over again. And until we developed enough experienced players, it was frequent that we would have to use our experienced players in the reserve side matches, because if you put 3 guys out there in a back line who'd never played together before, there was nothing but an unmitigated disaster, and somebody was going to get hurt.
So we went out and put flyers under all the doors before the first practice, and lo and behold, about 80 people showed up. And, and they had some great athletes. I think we'd put on the flyer, hey, if you're a frustrated high school football player, come on out for UT Rugby. We got a game for you, and we drink beer at the end. And so we did, and Butch watched the first practice, and he said, you know what, Danny, we're not very skilled. And I was like, no, we aren't. And he goes, but you know what, we're going to be fit. And unfortunately, Fulton Bottoms is equipped with a hill that's about 150 feet straight up in the air, and we spent all that fall season, because Butch, and truthfully at that time, didn't know that much about rugby, but he knew a lot about making us run up and down that hill. So we were a fit team and a scrappy team, and I think that was the first year, and we won about half our games.
Danny Paris was our first Eagle. Danny played in that transition period. He had been part of the side with the guys when we had the Metro guys, and then he was captain of the team the first season that we had when we played strictly students, and he was the rock. He was the anchor.
The next generation of players, Pig Pigler, the Rain Man, Mike McIntyre. We had a gentleman that I recruited off my floor, David Gentry, known as the Caveman, was probably the hardest hitting human being on the planet. And the team went from there.
I look at Danny, and I look at a guy who he had great athletic ability to begin with, natural-born leader. I actually had a chance to watch him in action when he was leading the Duck Brothers later, which, that was a nationally renowned sevens team. And that team was loaded with big egos and stud athletes, and they just gathered around him. He was the Pied Piper.
He was just like the glue that held the team together. Everybody looked up to him, and he was just the model, I guess, of what to be.
I know that he was probably the first person to actually maybe see something in me as a player and try to make it better. And I'm sure he was, as much as Butch was, I'm sure he was responsible for a lot of things that I learned.
I had no idea that he would continue on in D.C. and achieve the successes that he achieved. And then seeing him as part of the Eagles 7 side in the Hong Kong tournament, I thought, wow. And I guess you could say he got his start here because there wasn't high school rugby at that point in time. I thought that was pretty exciting stuff to see that.
Although he had moved on to the next phase in his career, the recruiting efforts of Danny and others would pay significant dividends as the 1980s dawned on UT Rugby.
In 79 and 80, we just had this huge wave of new players coming in. It was it was kind of like a migration. It was almost like a peak in recruiting, because a bunch of guys came in that ended up essentially being the foundation of UT Rugby for the next roughly 5 years. I happened to be part of that. Pat Shires, David Molesworth, our scrum half, a guy named Rob Farley, Mark Winger, Bob Ball, a whole bunch of really, really good players. Kevin Hurtubise, Robert Pigler, John Jokers. These were guys that came out at about the same time. John McCord and Bill Bailey. And at this point in time, I feel like I'm going to leave somebody out, but let's just suffice it to say that it was a real concentration of players came in all at once that really formed the essence of the team of the early to mid 80s.
The evolution of the team, when we all came, virtually none of us had actually played rugby, but we had all played football, baseball, basketball, Some of us had wrestled in high school, so we knew what it was like to be athletes. We knew what it was like to get in shape for a season, but we didn't know how to play rugby, and we definitely didn't know how to play together. And as we first started that season out, I think we lost virtually every single match we played in. But we played 2 matches every match. Most of us did, A side and B side. And when you do that, you end up getting much better, much quicker.
We started to move on from the split in the early 80s, from about 82, 83, 84. 82 was the first year that we'd beaten Vanderbilt. That was 5 years in the making. That was a pretty momentous win. 83 and 84, we had a lot of success on the field. 84, I think, was the first year we were ever nationally ranked by any kind of publication. We were winning a lot more than we were losing, and we had a good cadre of guys. The Mike McIntyres and the Pat Shires and the John Shaws.
Well, during our time together, as I said, so many of our matches in the first season or 2 were losses, and sometimes embarrassing. However, each season we improved, and our arch rival during that time period was Vanderbilt. And I remember us coming so close once in Nashville in the rain, in the mud.
We went over to Vanderbilt, and we were playing in Centennial Park in the mud, and it was one of those days when in the first half absolutely nothing went right. Terry Moore was playing in the centers. The ball came off his hands and picked 6, bam, just like that. Every time we turned around, we laid an egg. Halftime score was 31-0. And I didn't have much to say. It wasn't the kind of thing where there was a whole lot to say. It wasn't that we didn't know what to do. It just wasn't working. So I remember standing aside and everybody just standing there until about 30 seconds to go. And I just walked into the group and I said, okay, guys, now's the time you make up your minds whether you want to fold your tents and go home with your tail between your legs, or you come out and play the way we can play. We didn't win the game, but the final score was Vanderbilt, I think, 34 and us 31, and we were knocking on the door, and they were absolutely terrified.
Probably heard one of the most inspiring post-game speeches from a coach that I had ever heard, and those of us that were there that day will all remember that because it was so close. We were so close to the goal line, and then the next year when we faced Vanderbilt again, we were victorious.
We had a weekend early on, and I want to say that it was 1980, where we kind of shocked the world by we beat a very good Vanderbilt team and a very good Nashville team in the same weekend. It was a Saturday-Sunday situation where we beat both of these. And at that point in time, both of these programs were top-notch. And, so everybody kind of took notice. Wow, Tennessee, looks like they're on the rise.
I think the culmination of that was when we played Virginia Tech in a tournament in the spring. Virginia Tech had finished that year number 2 to Harvard, who went on to finish number 2 in the nation in national championship competition. And they came sliding down for this tournament, and we drew them first match. We got out ahead of them at halftime, and you could see there was a lot of gnashing of teeth and rending of garments in the opposition's huddle.
We were just flat out on fire that day. I mean, we were playing fast. I remember that's one significant thing about that game is our loose play was just, it was just beautiful. It was just clicking. There was this one point in time where I was getting a ball off the back of a ruck, and Rob Farley was blowing past me at full speed. He read what was going on, timed it perfect. I hit him in full stride, and he just was gone. Nobody was going to touch him. And I don't know exactly how far that try was. It was 30 to 40 meters. But it was the timing and what he saw before it actually materialized that just amazed me. And I was like, wow, that tells me something about how we're playing today.
So they came out in the second half, and they had a fullback who was a refugee from the football team. He'd been a punter and sustained some kind of an injury, so he decided to play rugby.
And this guy was big and fast, talented guy. He was probably, I'm going to say he was about 6'3", about 220. And man, he could just boom the ball with his kicks.
Anyway, he fields a kick, and he's taking it. He's got a good angle. It looks like he's got some open space. And just out of nowhere, shot out of a cannon, our fullback, P. Petrakis, hits this guy.
And it was one of those things where you heard it, you felt it, you saw it, and you thought somebody died. Petrakis hopped up. This guy stayed down. Petrakis walked about 3 or 4 feet. Then he took a knee. We stopped the game, and at that point afterwards, the floodgates opened. Keith Googe and McIntyre, John Shaw, John McCord, Terry Moore, they were all on the field that day. It was really quite an exhilarating experience. That was when he told me, I said, okay, yeah, we can play with the big boys. We have come this far.
For whatever reason, we all became fast friends. It was a group of guys that truly got along well, sincerely got along well. It was not contrived, affinity for each other. We did everything together.
When I first started playing, and I didn't understand this at the time because I was just trying to figure out the game and my place on the team. The team was on its way to the highest height that it was going to have in my 5 years at UT. It was a team that was filled with great players and great characters. The very first practice, I go out, and I think this is a little bit of a story too. I go out and I'm just told where to go, and so I walk up and people start to engage me, and I say, I'm looking for Mr. Robertson. And then I say, he recruited me. And Robert Pigler, who is one of the great characters and was one of the great players on those teams, says, come on, kid, we'll make an alcoholic out of you yet. and he might have moved me quite a far ways down that path.
Both my daughters played college soccer, played travel soccer, high school soccer, and then my second daughter was at a private school in Charlottesville, Virginia, and their team was, you could just sit in the stands and see that this team just was unique. They got along, they knew each other, the players that were on the bench supported. You could just tell when they played, they knew where the other person was going to be. And after about the third or fourth game of that season, I sat down with my daughter Megan and said, Megan, enjoy this. You will never, ever have another team like this again. And she was planning on playing college soccer. I said, I'm sorry to tell you, but you'll never experience this atmosphere, the friendships, how you get along. I said I played on one team. Of all the sports I played through high school and playing college rugby, I had one team. That was the '84 team. And it was just great for me to have that experience with all you guys, and then be on the parent side, be on the other side and see that, and everybody could see it. Not very many parents had that experience that I had and could relate to it, and it was just awesome.
One key member of that '84 team was a transfer from Wittenberg University in Ohio. A natural loose forward, Rob Farley would quickly leave his mark on the program.
When I think of Rob, I think of when he came out, and he was actually kind of a smallish loose forward. He probably weighed, I don't know, maybe 180. And but to his credit, this is a guy that worked extremely hard. Back in the days when fitness programs with the rugby team were not what they are today. Nobody was running around with their Fitbit on back then. But Rob, if you were out on campus, you'd see the guy running all the time.
I got a phone call from a guy that I played high school football with, and Rob Farley said to me, hey, Greg, man, what are you doing? And I said, oh, not much, Rob. What are you up to? So I'm about to go for a little run, and then I'm going to go play rugby. Would you like to come with me? And I said, I don't know what rugby is. He said, well, how are you fit? And I said, well, I think I'm fairly fit. I've been, running a lot. He said, you went to West Point, so y'all ran a lot. Yeah, I did. And so Rob jogged by my dorm room in about 3 minutes, and I went on a run down to Fulton Bottoms Field with Rob. And I thought, wow, that was a pretty good run. Well, then we started running, and by the time we were done with practice, I crawled to the Ivy's pub.
UT Rugby, for me, it established the fundamentals of rugby, and it taught me to take the game seriously. It wasn't just something you go out and run around with your head cut off for 40 minutes, 80 minutes, and then go off and have a celebratory time afterwards. It was a game that you could improve at, that you could express yourself at, and that you could get good. And it's the fundamentals that I think Butch taught. And then Butch taught it to the senior players, and the senior players taught it to me and to us. And so you carry with it this sense of organization that is needed, but also a seriousness to the game, but also a great a seriousness to the game, but an enjoyment of the game as well.
When he left the University of Tennessee, he obviously was well trained by Butch and had a good skill set, but then he went to play for a really good 15s program, Philly Whitemarsh. And I know some people that played against him when they were up there and said, again, the thing that set him apart was could cover more ground than anybody, never got tired. And he did put on weight. He made a commitment, it's my understanding, to a weight training program. So, got his weight up around 200, 210. And so the fact that he went on to become an Eagle, the testimonial to commitment, and he had good skills as well.
I started playing with Brandywine Rugby Club, and then I decided one fall I did that for about 2 years, and then decided to go play for the local union, the Eastern Pennsylvania Rugby Union, try out for it. Didn't know if I'd make it, and I went out and I got to play in a B match, and then I played in the next weekend. I played in an A match against another local area union, and then it started taking off. And then I got to go on and play for the Eastern Rugby Union. I was selected from those matches to play for the ERU. I was a substitute. I wasn't the first pick, and I was a substitute because somebody else couldn't make it into the interterritorials in 1988. And so I went and I played, and I was saying, all right, this is great. I played for the ERU, and then after that I got selected to play for the Junior Eagles, and I was surprised, and I was like, really? Okay, I'll go and play for them. And then I just did that, and then I got invited to, and didn't think anything else of it, and thought, all right, this will be it. I'll go on a tour of New Zealand with the Junior Eagles, which I was selected to do, and that would be it. And I would stay down in New Zealand and maybe play a little bit. I had no intention or belief that I would move up to the Eagles, the full side. But I broke my wrist, didn't go to New Zealand, so I stayed home that summer and trained, and then got invited to an Eagle camp. And from there, performed, and I got selected to play in the Ireland match in 1989, and I didn't have any belief that I would do it, but it was that moment I said, all right, I get to have I get to play for the Eagles. And I thought, all right, that would be a one-time deal. I probably won't get selected again, but that was fine. And then I kept getting selected for some reason. So I was like, all right, this is great. So I never had a moment where I was like, all right, I'm going to keep getting selected. But my whole goal, once I did get selected, was to keep training, to keep pressing, to get into the World Cup squad in '91. And so that's when I realized, all right, that's what I got to keep doing and working for. But up until that point, each match was just, I got to go out there and prove it that I belong. And never really thought, all right, I made it. I got to just keep doing it each week, each game, each match, perform the best that I can.
As the calendar moved from the mid to late 80s, there were plenty of changes for Big Orange Rugby, on the pitch and off. The first generation of all-student players who had formed the core of the early 80s teams had graduated and moved on, leaving the need to rebuild the numbers of experienced players. At the same time, Butch's family began to grow 2 by 2, which would create a tough balancing act to master.
Having 2 sets of twins, that wasn't in the plan, but every now and then the Lord throws a curveball at you, and you learn to live with it.
He did a good job. One of the big things, he did not take phone calls and do a lot of rugby planning at home. When he was at home with me and with the children, he really was at home, and he enjoyed being at home. He worked on the house, and so rugby was not an ever-present thing in the family, so he did a good job.
There were times when there were conflicts that were challenging to overcome, but thank goodness I married a good-looking woman who has poor taste in men, because she put up with an awful lot. When the kids came, we obviously had to modify our schedule. Fortunately, the guys I worked for were flexible enough because they were oriented towards the community, and they obviously understood how important this was to me. So we were able to kind of work around. There were times when I didn't make road trips on a regular basis just because of the fact that I couldn't take that time away from my family, particularly when we had twins coming in on a regular basis.
My relationship with rugby began when I met Butch, because we met at a rugby game. And by the time we married, he had been coaching and playing for 10 or 12 years. My dad had a saying, which Butch has later adopted, you got to take the fleas with the dog. And and so I guess that was it, that he was so involved. And also, I wasn't sure I was a hot enough ticket to make him separate from rugby. If I made him choose, I might be on the losing end.
I'm Scott Sandman. I played from 85 to 87, and then again from 90 to 92. I saw it go from that social side to a very competitive side. I left and went in the Navy, and when I came back, we had a couple international players that were playing with us. Simon Charles from England and Alan Hardman from Wales, and they sort of transformed the game. They had no fear of putting the ball on the foot. I remember watching Butch's head explode when they would, put an up and under, on attacking side of the field or even inside the 22. And it was just a different style of play.
The sport in the 80s was still a little more like football. It was 1 play, 2 play, 3 play. And when people like Alan came, his fitness level was astounding. I mean, we thought we exercised a lot, not at all. Alan brought a pace of play and then just a mindset towards that Butch adopted quickly, as well as the need for tactical play. He had skills. He could kick with both feet, both place kicking and touch kicking, and just really knew how to command the game.
I remember the first month I was there, going along to, I guess it must have been one of these clubs and societies showcases in the student centre. And I always remember that first time I went past the table. Gassan Kasira was there from Washington, D.C. So, and I guess, I stopped by and said, so you have a rugby team? And, the first thing he said is, what the fuck? That's the way he said to me, what the hell are you from? So that was the first introduction to UT Rugby. This was right at the dawn of the professional era. So, the game really didn't go professional until 93. So even back in the UK, when I was playing before I came out, it wasn't too much different in terms of, how much time you actually spent training in the club environment. I guess what the difference was is, of course, you had those years and years and years of exposure from a very early age of, playing ball on the in the schools, on the street, whatever. So that was the one thing. Yeah, the most difficult thing was to get players to understand, the bigger picture in terms of trying to understand a range of different skills. Generally speaking, it's just trying to get past that idea that players are either backs or forwards. That just basic things like if it's a ruck or a maul, then these 8 guys do that stuff, and then these other 7 do something else. There's trying to get those fundamental basics shifted, but it worked with some players that they were able to be more adaptable and develop a range of different skills. So whatever they saw in front of them, they played the situation rather than a particular role. I mean that was the main thing. Mm-hmm. Is I guess being delicate and trying to get the balance right between recognizing that you've got to be able to have people to play these roles. If you don't get a good type 5 because they're away, developing, how to do, dummy scissors switches or whatever, all these kinds of things, all these, passing and handling skills, then you're never going to win any ball anyway. And also getting them to recognize actually, any player could be in any situation and called upon to do a range of different skills at any one time. So that was the biggest thing.
And we just had a good core group of people that liked each other, enjoyed playing the game. I was playing with Mike Doolin and Eddie Everett at that point, Tyler Husky, Jonathan Pledger, too many to name.
It was a time where the game started to get faster. It stopped being this ugly mass sort of floating around, and it became a much more fluid game, a much faster game as we were playing. And it was right at the beginning of that era. As we move forward, right after I left is when they started lifting into lineouts, and a lot of other changes in the game came in. So we saw that because the level of athleticism sort of jumped up right when we were there and playing, the game evolved behind it. In the time I was there, we went from, the cadence was first introduced into the scrum. The crouch, touch, engage first came in when I was there. Just before that, it had been the standing scrum where everybody just launched into it, and there's no cadence, and we go to much more organization. So we were right there in that midpoint of where the game had been and where it was going.
Probably my fondest memory of my playing days at UT was we went to a Clemson University. They had a April Fool's Day Massacre tournament, a 15s tournament they used to have every year in the first weekend of April, and we went, and we were excited about going because James Madison at the time was undefeated, and they were #1 in Virginia, and they were coming to the tournament, and we were kind of hoping that we would match up, and we ended up doing that. We ended up meeting them in the finals, and we had only had 3 points scored on us. I can't remember the numbers, but we finished the tournament like 143 points and 3 against, and we beat James Madison in the final, I think 42-0. And about halfway through the second half, the captain on their team left the field in tears. So that was a highlight. It was fantastic.
We expected to win every time we walked on the field, and we had a unique group of guys. We had some of the first guys who'd played in high school and been playing for a long time were part of that team. And then you had guys who'd played college football who were coming out to be part of that as well.
I actually learned about the rugby team. I was living on Forest Avenue, and they were having a party down the street, and I was out on the porch, and a naked guy with a pizza box in his hind end was running past me. I was like, well, I got to go down there and see what's going on. And it turned out it was the rugby team after a game, and cops pulled by, and they said, is anything going on? And the rugby guy said, no, not a thing. And he said, okay, just make sure everything's okay, and drove on. And that was sort of my first picture of what it was. And that kind of got me out. It's like, well, these guys don't seem too bad. They like to have a good time and go out there and hit each other.
I think when you go out and you practice together on a Saturday morning, not feeling great, maybe early on before the season starts, you get out there on a Saturday morning. We used to play at the chicken farm, practice out there. You may have practiced out there. Just cold and miserable, but you get out there and you do it. You get out and you sweat and you bleed together, and it's almost, I've never been in the military. I wouldn't want to compare it to that at all. Obviously, we're not doing that, but I mean, there is that sense of just like, these are my brothers. These are people that it sounds silly to say you're going to fight for them or whatever, but you're going to take up for them. You're going to help them. You're going to play hard for them. You're going to look out for them and protect them.
Butch has always been a teddy bear. Just a big cuddly bunny in a pair of shorts and high socks. No, Butch was a driver, and he certainly had an idea of what he wanted and knew his way to get us to that point. I kind of saw two different versions of Butch. We walk out onto the field to practice at the chicken farm once, and we had to practice on the ag campus, and it was 4 degrees, not 40, not 14, 4. And Butch comes out and he's all bundled up, and I think he had his cargo pants on that probably had a small fire built in them to keep him warm, and several layers under that, and we're in sweats and things like that. And he sits there, watches us flip the ball around for a little bit, and he looks at me, "Gentlemen, we play this game in shorts." We play this game in shorts, Butch? Seriously? Look back at him, and yeah, he's serious about it. So we're all out of the sweatpants and everything else, and we're in a practice in 4 degrees in shorts because of that way it was. And that's who Butch was. There was an expectation of excellence. There was an expectation of doing things, of doing things the right way as well as we knew. And that expectation was generally met.
The team back then, if you had to characterize it, was fit, thanks to Butch. Very scrappy, very tough, and strong-headed, I'd say.
Back when I played, it was a lot of having a good time and just being guys. So you got into mischief and trouble. But at the same time, as the captain, and Tyler was the captain and Kalavakis was the captain, coaches didn't travel with us. So we did have to take on a role when we were on the road or even at home, because coaches really didn't say anything to you during the game. It was on our shoulders to sort of lead the team, to keep them in order, keep them in line, not get into too much trouble while on the road, and bring things together and sort of have that aspect of being a coach, administrator, and a rugby player, which I had to grow into it, and it was difficult. But Tyler was a good example. Kalavakis was a good example before me. So we sort of grow into it and sort of take that role on and made the best of it.
Penn State came to play us, and I think it was 1993. I just made the A side at outside center, and they came down. They were number 4 in the nation. Coached by Alan Hardman, who was a former UT Old Boy, phenomenal rugby player. So we were a little worried. They were on tour and kicking everybody's behinds.
Mike Jockman, he helped coach back when I played, and at the time he was a steal of a man, just rugged. If Jocko says something, you did it. I think at halftime it was 0-0 or 5-0. It was a pretty close game, and Jocko gets the fours together. And, guys, you got to discombobulate them. We had no idea what Jocko was talking about, and having words like that come out of Jocko's mouth, I think surprised us more than anything.
We put the whooping to them and beat them 18-0. And some of their guys were crying, and after that wanting to buy our T-shirts. So that was kind of cool. That was one of my favorite memories, yes.
I don't remember when it was, but say my sophomore or junior year, USA Rugby started to change the rules a bit. So they started to not allow graduate students anymore, and they put a limit on it. So that really kind of, there's a lot of, I won't say attrition, people didn't go off willingly, but, there were some lean years, in the 93 to 96, where we were only practicing with 16, 17 guys most of the time, because most of those upperclassmen had moved on, and, there were some new kids coming in, but not very many. We had a core with Mike Weldon, Sean Van Dyke, Chris Doolin, who came in. They were all there was this guy, Crazy Legs, named Adam. I can't remember his last name, from Cincinnati. We were all these freshmen who had started with all these older guys, and then pretty soon as sophomores and early juniors, we were having to be the leadership of this team. And we're leading a small group, but a good group. We still played really, really well, obviously, with the leadership of Butch.
If you go back and look at the program through the eras, there have always been cycles. And it's primarily a function of people. You get a bunch of guys in, and you get them coached up, you get them trained up, and then they graduate. And if the pipeline is full, then you keep on going. And if the pipeline is empty, then you experience a bit of a dip. As I said, we were doing fairly successfully in the early 80s till late 70s, early 80s, and then guys left, and then we built up again to the mid 80s, and then we ran into a dry well again, and then in the early 90s, we started over again and building up, and having some very fine success. And then we had another little dip, and then in the early 2000s, again, the cycle started. And then, of course, having Marty come into the program in, I think it was 1996, that made a huge difference, because all of a sudden, there's a fresh set of eyes on things.
That fresh set of eyes would be a crucial shot in the arm of UT Rugby, as Marty would help set the tone for the program heading into the new millennium.
My first of two daughters were born in January of '96, and I retired from playing with the Knoxville Rugby Club. So once I realized my playing days were over, I was looking for something else to do. I actually thought I'd be a referee. And I actually did do some refereeing the first few years after I retired from playing, and I really thought that was my path. But through a couple of a series of events, it kind of took a different direction.
When Marty joined the program, in my opinion, it was a godsend. It happened almost accidentally. He lives in the same area of town that I do. We encountered each other in a parking lot of a grocery store. And I asked him what he was doing, and it turns out his oldest child, Claire, had been born the previous season. I can't remember whether it was fall or spring.
And he was looking for some help because he had a lot of guys and wanted another coach to come out and help a day or two a week, and so I volunteered to do it.
He brought a tactical sense to the game that I never had. My background was the kind of thing where, all right, get fit, go knock the other guy down. You had your basic switch play, you had your basic loop play, deep three rotation, and then, by God, let's have at it, That's kind of where I was coming from.
I think they're two different people by far. When you think of Butch, it was grinding. He made us run a lot. And he's a forwards guy. He might not have necessarily known too much about us backs, and hell, I didn't know too much about rugby, but once Marty came on board and really helped us with the skill piece of the game, I think that really evolved. And so I kind of contribute Butch to the aggressive, beat him down and winning attitude, and I take Marty to the side of more of a skill player, more of a passive side when it comes to the kids. Back when I played, it could be different now after the years under Butch. But I think it's really evolved throughout the Tennessee Rugby program.
When I first started coaching with Butch at Tennessee, it was 1990s old school rugby, and it was what everybody did at the time. All the college coaches, they would coach their team 2 or 3 days a week, and then they would turn their team loose on the weekend. They would go play, and then they would call and let the coach know how they did, and then okay, what do we need to work on, and the captain would tell them what they needed to work on, would tell the coach what they need to work on, and then they would work on it the next week, and they'd go off and send them off again to play the next weekend. Coaches didn't travel with the team, very much. Maybe for the big tournaments or something they would, but it was just students piling in cars, taking off. And so I would focus on the backs, and Butch would take the forwards, and that's kind of how we worked it out. After Mike Jockman left, because he was obviously a forwards coach. And then so we kind of evolved through that, and then it became more of a, I was exposed to some level of some pattern of play and things through some things I was doing with All-Stars and things like that. So I got more involved with developing game plans and pattern of plays, and Butch became more of the disciplinarian coach that would be in charge of fitness and contact area and things like that. And so we kind of evolved through that. In the 90s, rugby was, college rugby was all about recruiting guys off campus that you thought were athletes. Put in a basic concept of here's how you tackle, here's how you ruck, here's how you scrum. Putting all that together and throwing them on the field and making sure your team was fitter than the other team. But then what happened is in the 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, we saw international students start to influence the game. And then we had colleges that would actually go and recruit multiple students from overseas. They would recruit multiple players from overseas and turn them into students here for a semester or a year, things like that. And so they brought a level of skill and development within their teams that we hadn't seen. And we were behind then. I mean, there were some teams in the area that worked heavily on international recruiting, and some that still do. But that kind of stepped us back a little bit, and we had to realize, well, we've got to teach a little different brand. There's got to be a little more evolved into the continuity to spread the game out a little bit and to put good players in space and to work the ball to an athlete that could make a play. And then how do you do that? You may set up 3 phases for that third phase to be the one player you want to have the ball because you know they can execute whatever they need to execute. And I think if you look back in some of our history with guys like Jason Gruner and Brian Melroy and Scott Jones, and that was kind of the pattern that we played then. We would move the ball around, and then we'd create enough space on defense to where one of those guys would get a gap, and then off we went. And we were very successful with that.
One of the standout players from those late 90s, early 2000s teams, Scott Jones, would become the 3rd UT player to go on and play for the Eagles.
I started playing in the centers. I was an outside center, and the reason I think they put me in that spot is they saw I was fast, and they needed somebody that could run with the ball, and that's what I love to do. I love to run with the ball, and they didn't think I was quite big enough to play center at the next stage, so they moved me to fullback. And fullback seemed to fit in nicely with my kicking ability and the ability to cover a lot of space, not to mention the open field tackle, which I really enjoyed, and I was bound and determined not to let anyone get past me. I think the structure for USA Rugby I thought it was really good at the time for finding new prospects. It could have been a little bit more biased towards the location or area where you were. The South didn't get a lot of love when it came to rugby, and I think it makes sense when you talk about the talent that's on the West Coast and the Northeast. At the time, we might not have had the skills in certain positions to make us as stand out as much. Maybe we didn't have the surrounding support with us to do that. But it was a national championship series where they selected the All-American teams. I went to my first one, 98 to 99, and at that time, Lance Hoyle, who I spoke about earlier, was my inside center, and I was the he was my fly half, and I was the inside center, and it just so happened I had a standout tournament, and I was like, wow, I can really compete at this all-star level. Well, the next year, 99 to 2000, I became an All-American at fullback. So maybe Marty was right. I should move back to fullback. I might have a better look based on my size and stature, and it panned out. And from that day forward, I believe I had one more year, 2000, 2001, and I think from that next level, I decided when I graduated I wanted to continue playing rugby, and from then on, my goal was to make the USA team, and that sort of propelled me with the attitude to do so.
With a new coaching staff in place and new ways of approaching the game, UT moved into the 2000s with a solid foundation. But no one could foresee the quantum leap forward the team was about to take, thanks to the vision of a few former rugby players in Middle Tennessee.
In 2000, here locally, a group of us got together and decided we wanted to start youth rugby. And so we got together and we thought we'd just put out some flyers in the schools, called it Youth Rugby, and put everybody together and started showing up at different dates, different places, all the way from Murfreesboro to Nashville and locally in Brentwood, Franklin area. And 3 people showed up in Smyrna. So we had another meeting, and we went from taking a shotgun approach by calling it Youth Rugby and took more of a rifle approach and called it what we really thought it would be anyway, as high school rugby, and called it Tennessee High School Rugby. And we advertised it as such. We put everything in the schools. Next thing you know, we had 15, 20 kids show up at the different sites, and we had 8 teams in our first year that grew to 10 before we actually had the schedule set, based on Brentwood High School, for example, having so many kids that we actually had an A, B, and C team, and just made sure we kept them safe. We went out to a Nash Bash, and on the Sunday, of course, when most of the other things had died down, and had 15-minute scrimmages. And what we saw in that time, these kids, from their first 15 minutes, their second 15 minutes, their learning curve was so fast, we knew we were onto something.
Years ago, when we were still in the mode of trying to play sides that regularly fielded large groups of international players, I would continually frustrated by the fact that the guys weren't better athletes necessarily, or they weren't fitter, they just had a more skill set because of the fact that they'd been playing since they were 10 or 12, and my guys had been playing since they were 18 or 19, and there were just obvious differences. They had instincts that we didn't, and I can remember many times being frustrated thinking, you know, someday, if we have kids who've played 4 years in high school and then they play 4 years in college, okay, this is going to be a level playing field.
At first, I had no skills. They were devoid. I mean, basically, you come in with all your American sports background. You know, I've played basketball, sure. You do a little chest pass. It's kind of like that. Soccer, you try to find space. Football, obviously, the contact. Wrestling, how to position yourself in contact. And so, you know, you just go after it. I mean, it's just like these kids now. But you know, they have a little bit of a head start now that the high school league's so established. They probably come in with a lot better skills than we did back in the early aughts.
The arrival of players with high school experience might have been what the coaches hoped for, but it wasn't exactly a dream come true for all members of the team.
The older guys, some would embrace, some, you know, came in with a little bit of a chip on the shoulder. Let's show these guys who's boss. And I think it also corresponded to who your competition was. One of the older guys I forgot to mention earlier was Jeremy Linney, and he was the starting scrum half when I came in. And so I came in for a sevens tournament after I graduated high school in between my freshman year, and played with some of those older guys, and we were out and they were drinking beer. I was watching, but they were like, oh yeah, you can fight for a spot. You know, you might squeeze into the starting role. You know, that Lenny guy, he gets hurt a lot. So I came in thinking maybe I could compete for the starting spot, and I think Lenny showed me what was up pretty quick there for the first year or so. But I did manage to get on the field a little bit, but not in his spot.
The story I think I would tell about my introduction and how I probably didn't do myself any favors ingratiating myself to the older guys as I showed up, thinking I was, you know, the best player on the field, which, you know, is a really bold thing to think as a freshman who doesn't know anything about the world or collegiate rugby. And there was a guy named Jason Gruner who was the president of the team at the time and probably the best athlete on the team. And Gruner kept giving me a hard time because I had this bad habit when I played sports for forever that when I get tired, I'd fold my shirt up. And so, you know, it'd be like a belly shirt. And he kept calling me Britney Spears. And before the end of the practice, and this was one of my first practices, I just went ballistic and challenged him to a fight and told, you know, I was so full of just testosterone and, again, not being a good teammate, not realizing what it was all about and, you know, the give and take and those sorts of things, and also being so eager to prove myself. I'm sitting here calling out the senior president and best athlete on the team, and I think all the older guys had a good laugh about that. And what I appreciate is, I mean, Gruner and I became good friends, and I still really, you know, look up to Gruner to this day as somebody who was a successful rugby player and then a successful entrepreneur afterward.
There was quite a few players who hadn't played. That was their first day. So our sort of
there's such a learning curve with rugby kind of in general, but it would take 4 to 6 weeks of, going back to the basics and bringing those guys up before we could really, as a full team, start making any, big steps forward again. And, there was sort of this balance we'd have to strike between like an athlete that shows up but doesn't know what he's doing, right, and a guy who's played 4 years in high school and 3 to 4 years in college but isn't quite as talented. So we constantly had to juggle that around.
When I first went in, my head was spinning. I got on that field the first time. I think it was the orange and white game. I had no clue what I was doing. I just know I got to pass the ball backwards. Don't pass it forward. A lot of guys I played with in my class went to Brentwood, and they had, I think, a championship team coming in. So a lot of those guys knew the sport, were able to just, if I had a question, give me a quick answer, and end up living with a lot of them too. So bouncing questions off them, after practice and that type of stuff, because we had that type of bond and that camaraderie on the team to where, if you needed help, your brother's going to have your back type deal.
From those early classes, Josh P. and Brett Jones, the first, and then Kevin Hartley and Benji Goff, and those guys that from those early high school days, are the foundation of the success we had in the 2000s and all the way up to today.
One of the side effects of having more experienced players joining the program was that the coaches soon realized they had to up their game.
We started getting our first high school kids about 2002, 2003. And then in 2004, we made our first appearance in the National Sweet 16 competitions. That's been a real important boost, because you don't go through the business about this is a rugby ball, it's this long, and this is how you pass. You don't do that.
I think it was a kind of a culture shock that the rookies that came in were not incredibly green my first year, and that goes all the way up to Butch. Butch had us in our first practice standing in a line and literally handing the ball, from player to player. I mean, we were all bored to tears, but I think Butch had done it that way for so many years, and I think he started to see, hey, these guys are ready for a little bit something else.
I would say almost the entire time we were there, we were transitioning from kind of more of a social club atmosphere to being like really pretty competitive, and setting some pretty hardline standards. And so, UT is a club, right? It's like the coaches are volunteers. We're not really getting anything real as far as like a scholarship, so it's not necessarily a job. So it's really up to the coaches. Yeah, they coach, but really the team will form whatever the players really will of it, right? So we were all going through a transition. They were recognizing that. They were doing their best to provide that right environment for us to be successful for what we wanted. And so yeah, there were struggles. Sometimes we'd come out to practice and we'd get bored with stuff. And then the next week we'd come out and there'd be 5 new things we'd never done before. So you could tell that they were recognizing it, but there was a little lag on it, and that's to be expected.
In terms of foreign players, we didn't have many. We did have an exchange player here and there, and they always helped, but they were kind of transient, and we were a core of Tennessee boys. We were high school, local high school league raised up mostly. We always had guys from cross sports, different sports that would come in, and just athletes. But yeah, it was grown from high school rugby, and as those guys trickled into the program, it was good to know that it was built, not on just our efforts, but on the efforts of those who started the high school league.
The leadership when I first came onto the team was still Josh P. and BJ Jones, Chris Stump, and Josh Hawk. They were the leaders on the team for sure. But some of the guys that were in my class had already blended in. Shane Randolph was in the front row. Kyle Demiola was at center. And I can't believe I'm going to mention his name this early in this thing, but Kevin Hartley was obviously starting already. And there was a lot to learn from already, but there was still a lot of learning going on too. It was a very supportive environment, but it was competitive. People held you accountable.
There are a lot of games that really still resonate with me. The first one was a game against Arkansas State my freshman year. And I'll never forget going into that Arkansas State game knowing that we had them scheduled and just assuming it was going to be one of these teams we could just walk right over. And a lot of guys telling me in practice leading up to that, they're one of our biggest rivals, that they are really good, and we need to be prepared for that. So we go into that game, and it was, probably my third game at UT, and at the time I wasn't starting. I was usually getting subbed in at half, and I got subbed in, and I was fired up and ready to go. And I can't remember exactly what the score was, but it was a super close game. In fact, we may have either barely been the lead or it may have been tied. And one of the early plays, I committed an offside penalty. And they kicked for post, made it, and went up. That's all I remember is they took the lead. I don't remember by how many. And I'll never forget, Jeremy Linney, who was the captain, came to me, looked me right in the eye and said, "You owe us one." And I remember realizing, like, oh man, like there's accountability here. And I don't remember what happened or what play I made or if it even was that great of a play, but I did something that helped us set up a score. And we ultimately ended up winning that game. And I remember Lenny coming back to me after that and saying, something to the effect of, you made good on your mistake, and patted me on the back.
With a never-before-seen level of experience, the UT team was poised to reach new heights for the program.
Arriving in the national tournament my freshman year is when I realized just how much I was going to, love playing collegiate rugby. We got there, and all of a sudden, it was us and Penn State and Air Force, and there was one other team. Oh, it was Norwich. I was never sure how to pronounce it. It was a Northeastern team that had qualified. And every team was there, organized, looked the part, and played the part. And I realized, boy, there are a lot of schools that take this really seriously. And there is another level that you can get to. And of course, I learned very quickly in that Air Force game just what it was like to play against that next level, because the first play, the kick came to me and I fielded it and did what I do and thought, no, I'm going to, run around and run over these people. And all I remember is somehow I ended up lifted in the air. And I was just being held in the air like a little kid by several Air Force players. And one of them just reached up and pulled the ball out of my hand. And then they just set me back down and they beat us really, really badly. And so the next day in a consolation match, which was very important back then because this is how they determined seeding for the next year's national tournament, or whether the South would still get two teams, because it was a big deal that the South had two teams in the national tournament. We were the 16 seed. We lost brutally to Air Force, who was the 1 seed, and we were playing Penn State the next day. And Penn State was ranked 8, and they were this dominant team. And we came out, and Penn State ran in 3 straight scores. And this is after, I think we lost 77-10 to Air Force. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to get embarrassed again, and we're going to get run off the field. And all I remember is Lenny bringing the team together, and I don't even remember who all spoke, but in my head it was Stump and Lenny and Garrett Jernigan and maybe Vinny, and they all basically said the same thing, we aren't doing this shit. If we're going to lose this game, we're at least going to go down and make them know they played us. And no joke, we scored something like 55 unanswered.
At one point in time, we were down 14-15 in scoring.
It was one of the most gratifying wins I've ever had in any sport.
With national tournament experience now under their belt, the expectations of the program were higher than ever, and so was the competition.
Once you got to Elite 8, then you're playing against guys who've been recruiting internationally. And you're playing against programs, a lot of programs who are, more varsity. And they've got a lot more resources, essentially, than we did. So San Diego State, they had a couple players that were on the USA team. Or they had one player who was on the USA team. And rugby IQ, it's one of those things you make every mistake, right, once, and then you learn it, and that's how you learned it. Well, we learned it that one. JB and Nick go into a tackle on one of the San Diego State players, and JB hits him high. So JB dislocated his shoulder, probably had a concussion, bloody nose. Him and Nick actually hit. And the referee calls penalty for a high tackle, and we all stop because JB is like really in some pretty bad shape, and we assumed that the ref, the sir, would stop the game, cart him off, we'll go. Well, and I'm blanking on his name right now actually, but he taps and goes quick, takes off, scores. We lose the game. So it was one of those things where now, you know, if that kind of situation, I would have completely ignored Jonathan. You know, and been hollering at people to get on the line, because I've seen that happen so many times now. You just can't put a price on how valuable, you know, just raw experience is, you know, playing against better players, having them pull these little tricks on you, right? And then you go do it against other people.
That experience and the lessons learned would never be more important than in the spring of 2008, when the team once again found themselves in the national tournament in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
We had another really, really, really good team. And, you know, we had so many returning veterans. I mean, guys who I haven't mentioned actually, like Shane Randolph, who was our captain the year before, came back for his 5th year, and Shane was a great player. And Kyle Demiola, who was a great player the whole time, the rare guy who moves from center to prop and still plays at a kind of all-world level. And just athletes all over the place. We were Co-South champions, but ended up with the 16 seed and having to play Cal again, but this time in the first round, and this time an even more dominant Cal team than the one we had faced before. So we go out there to play Cal, and we're thinking, okay, 66-3 last time, we're a lot better now. We're going to come out here, and we've gotten a lot better, and we think we can compete with them. And honestly, almost the exact same thing happens. One of the first plays, I got the ball, I broke a run, they call a penalty, and we end up kicking and making it and going up 3-0. And I remember just yelling at all these Cal guys about how they weren't going to be able to stop me, and it was going to happen all day. And no joke, I think they ran in 100 straight points.
They were tunneling over us, I swear, I think those guys were digging underneath us to come through. They just popped up everywhere. That was the year Cal went through the whole play and won. The closest game they had was about a 25-point victory. The next day, we came out and we played Army. We'd had a kind of a group meeting at the hotel. We were out in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And one of those games again, to go, okay, guys, what are we going to do?
So we came out to play Army, and man, it's a lot like some of the games I've mentioned. 2 quick scores by them. We had to come to Jesus, except now I wasn't the freshman anymore. I was the 5th year, and I was the guy who lit into everybody and said, we are not going down this way. And we didn't. And we ended up in just the craziest match you've ever seen. Honestly, the craziest match.
We just wouldn't quit. I remember we would get knocked down, and it's not that we would get back up. We would punch straight off the mat. I just couldn't believe it. You know, they were bigger, they were faster, they were supposed to be fitter. You know, it's West Point. But then they would score a try, and then there would just be a little bit of individual heroism, just courage by 1 or 2 people, and then we'd score. It hung in there, and everybody had their chance to give a little bit of that heroism, and they did. Every single person stood up. I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
And so at the end of the regulation period, we scored to tie the game.
No time left. I think James Hagee, who was a big prop second row for us, and the biggest guy I ever played with. He was probably 6'5", 6'6", close to 300 pounds, but he could move. Phenomenal athlete for the size he was, and it was his first year playing rugby. And, you know, we're going deep in our roster at this point, and he scores with no time left.
So we go into overtime. And that was 2 10-minute periods, and at the end of the second 10-minute periods, we score to tie it again.
They were about to score and go ahead. I think it was in overtime. And they were on just a wide open break, and it was nobody but this guy running the ball and Chubbs Jones. And Chubbs Jones, he hit this guy with this perfect Spider-Man tackle, and the guy's legs went out completely under him. And I had been pursuing the tackle from behind, And when Chubbs hit him, it was such a hit and a long tackle, I was able to get over and back around and poach the ball from there. I got it up and I got it out, and then it went to Chad and we kicked it out. And then I actually think that the next phase is when we took it down and we scored.
We have the ball, no time left. And I believe it was Steve Neighbors, and I should have mentioned everybody I played with by now, but I haven't. But Neighbors was a really hard-nosed guy who played front row and flanker for us, and he was a dirty work guy. He rucked, he tackled, he did all the dirty work, and I couldn't believe it at the time, but I knew before it happened, he had never scored in an A-side match.
I had not scored a single try my entire career at Tennessee Rugby. And what Hartley had said at one point in time, it was after I got chased down from behind against Georgia. Everybody in the sideline, I had this breakaway, and Marty's screaming, "Go, go!" And a second row dragged me down from behind. It's never gonna happen. It's just not gonna happen. And Hartley said, "No, it's gonna happen. It's gonna be like the national tournament, a game-winning try or something like that."
Take it. Oh, get it, Haugie.
Because they didn't have a response to Haugie. Haugie was huge, and every time he went into a tackle, he would take 2 or 3 of them for a ride about 4 or 5 meters. And so we had a break, and we were down within about 6 or 7 meters, and I just called the audible to Chubbs and said, "Give it to Haugie," and Haugie was exhausted. Haugie was on a scale of 1 to 10 being tired, he was like a 50. He was done. And I remember grabbing him by the jersey and said, "Just grab this one, trust me." And he said, "Okay, I'll do it." And he went out and he got it, and he just bowled through him, and he was on the line when he had it. And they hadn't quite realized what happened, and I just grabbed the ball from him and I put it on the line, and the referee was standing right there. And everyone on the sideline was confused because they thought it was Haugie. They're like, "But Haugie scored before, what was that?" I will never forget that.
Heading into the second overtime, UT would face 2 massive tests in determining the outcome of the game, and the big, talented Army team would be the easier one.
So we are now playing in the 110th minute of rugby. And the game comes to a stop because our number 10, Andrew Melroy, got lit up and we had to bring in a substitute.
I don't even remember what happened exactly. All I know is I got the ball somehow from somebody with a few teammates flanking me. And I had offloaded to a guy named Andy Melroy. And all I remember is seeing a blur of an Army player come through as we're still running down the field, and Melroy let the ball go back to me. Melroy got hit as hard as you'll ever see anybody get hit. And it really was actually a really scary moment because I remember looking over and he was on the ground doing what people do when they have really bad concussions, which is he had an arm that was involuntarily twitching. It was a bad moment. It was a scary moment, an emotional moment.
He got hit pretty hard in the corner. He actually went into some sort of seizure, had a pretty bad concussion. The whole game stopped, and people were pretty torn up about it, even in the moment.
I was in a support line behind Melroy when he got hit, so I saw him when he went down and he started to convulse. I remember Demiola crying. I remember Marty pulling us over and just trying to get us to focus back in.
And it was in such a crucial part of the game at the end of the game, and everyone's emotions were very, very high. We waited for Melroy to be taken off, an ambulance came, and we continue with the game. This is still in second overtime.
And our guys, I'm telling you, I think you see that happen to a teammate, and everybody came out ready and wanting to do it for him. And it was their scrum, and we're deep in their territory. And all I remember is our scrum, those forwards bowling them over. We take the ball, swing it wide. I know it hit my hands, hit a couple other guys' hands, and I think we got it down to, we are on the goal line. And it came back to us, and went to this guy, Chad Edmonds, and selfishly, I remember I'm outside of wide open, screaming for the ball, but I'm telling you, Chad was a phenomenal athlete, and Chad probably broke 3 tackles flat. If he had made up his mind.
Chad takes it, finds a break, and scores right underneath the post.
Go, God. Go, go, go. Go, Chad. Go, Chad. Yes!
And everyone flees the sidelines and runs into the middle. And this is really one of the few times I remember all of us in rugby coming together and and sing Rocky Top.
The Army game in and of itself was pretty incredible. Double overtime win after that Cal game the day before, but there had actually been a pretty massive setup to that. And what it was is Arkansas State started getting a lot of South African players. So we had tied in the Mid-South Championship, and because Arkansas State had point differential, they drew whoever it was, Utah or something, and we got Cal. And there had been a lot of talk around USA Rugby of saying, well, maybe we need to eliminate the South 2 seed because they just can't compete. And I think the reason why was that Clemson had a tough showing in the year before, and we had lost in the Sweet 16 to Penn State by a point. We left a lot of points on the field that game, but so there was talk about they were going to take away the seed if we didn't perform, and then we got Cal, and there was that game. So in the whole grand scheme, the concept of what it was, that Army game really was about the second seed for the South. And no one gave us a snowball's chance in that game. And between Mel getting injured and it going into overtime, all the other games had finished, and so the sidelines were packed with people. And cheering loudest of all were those Arkansas State guys. They went berserk for us. And having all of that support, you know, the parents who followed us out there, the A-State guys, and then, I mean, there were people in close from all kinds of clubs that were there, and then they were just pulling for us as hard as they could. And I think that did make a very convincing statement to USA Rugby that while we don't have the same resources, while we do struggle once we get out at the top level and we have to compete against, really, let's be honest, practically professional clubs, we're still going to punch above our weight class. And I think, you know, the combination of Mel getting hurt, winning that game, and then also the relief. Tennessee Rugby is all about personal accountability, and, you know, we had said as a team that we were going to be accountable and we were going to be responsible for that number 2 seed. And, you know, goddamn, we defended it. And we didn't just do that for Tennessee Rugby, we did it for rugby in the South. And I am extraordinarily proud of that.
It's absolutely incredible to go from that disaster yesterday to this courageous triumph today. It just defies description. And I know when I go to my grave, this is what I'm going to remember. Thank you.
Well, I resigned as head coach in 2011, and it was time. We had entered into a challenging season, trying to play at an elite level, which meant significant distances of travel to places like Oklahoma and Notre Dame. Marty had to take some time off, and effectively we had 2 schedules. I remember loading some kids into cars on a Friday night, driving over to Vanderbilt to play a reserve side match under the lights, coming back at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, getting up the next morning to go out to the rugby park to play a varsity match, and collecting all the jerseys and going back down to the laundromat because you couldn't do those in your home laundromat, and falling asleep in the laundromat on a Saturday afternoon, then spending hours on Sunday trying to parse through game film. That got to be a struggle, and I started to have quite candidly, some health issues.
It was way too much. He has some health problems and has for a while, particularly heart issues. And, but he has seemed to recuperate from everything that happened, and things were always all right until that season. And that was just overwhelming. So yeah, I was concerned then.
After dealing with his health issues, it wouldn't be long before the mustache was roaming the sidelines again, adding the demanding yang to Marty's yen.
I became the T-shirt merchant, and the guy who would walk up to the alumni on the sidelines and say, John, when was the last time you wrote a check? You know, that kind of stuff, and glad handing and whatnot, and occasionally jumping in a car and driving over to Nashville, places like that, to host old boys events. Then about 2 years ago, Andy Allen, who was the principal assistant at that time, had to take on a new job, and he travels extensively. So there was a hole. And Marty and I had this conversation on my deck on a summer afternoon. It involved a six-pack of beer, and we got to the end of the conversation, and it was a circular conversation because I'm not really sure whether I asked or whether he asked or how we got there, but at the end of the conversation it was, well, practice starts at 5 o'clock on Tuesday. And I said, okay, I'll be there with a whistle. What would you like me to do? And it's been a lot of fun to get back into it, to get back into knowing the kids and working with the kids, covering Marty's back, because he's like everybody else. He's got a job, he's got a family, and being retired from the real world and just working out of my house every now and then, I've got more time to be able to help.
There are a lot of things over the years that have happened in our society that has changed the makeup of our game. We can go all the way back to when the drinking age went up to 18 to 21. When the drinking age changed, that changed the dynamics of a lot of things. I think most of us remember the day that have as many gray hairs as I do anyway, the days where after every practice you went to the bar. That's just what you did. I mean, that was part of being part of the team. Those days are obviously gone for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is the 18 to 21 rise in the drinking age. And the other reason is a lot of these kids now have grown with the sport and they have a high performance attitude. And so they may not be as interested in doing that every night as we were when we were 21, 22 years old. And then things like social media that didn't exist 20 years ago, and the internet, and all, every team has the better your website, the better off you are, answering questions for prospective students and parents. And then it's also a place to document history. I mean, our website, we take a lot of pride in the fact that our website has a lot of history on it, and guys can go out there and find out information about our team. And then social media side, obviously, is an animal that we're still trying to tackle. Whether it be tweeting live during the games, or now we're talking about, hopefully within a year, we'll be web streaming our 15s games for people to watch. And Facebook and Instagram, you could go on and on. Those are things that somebody has to take care of.
Marty's someone I've always had the utmost respect for, not just because I played against him for many years when I was at UK and he was at Tennessee Tech, but he's a quality person, and he cares about these young men, not just as their rugby ability, but how they turn out as young men. So he helps them go beyond just their rugby playing ability. So we get Marty through our program, we get him coming to events, we get them coming for signings. We now actually have signings along with the footballers and the baseballers and the basketball players. We have rugby signings, and they commit to these schools, and it's cool. Some of them get some scholarships, which help with everything from books to a little bit more.
I played in high school for a couple of years, and we had one of our tournaments out here at the park, and my coach actually introduced me to Marty, and he sent me, he got me his contact information and got in touch with me, and I figured I'd give it a try, and I've loved it ever since then.
Playing rugby here has impacted my overall college experience. It's really given me a reason to push in the classroom, to keep my grades up. So I know if I keep my grades up, then I can play. And I really love to play. So it really it gives me a focus in class to pay attention and do my best on and off the field. It's something that coaches really drive into. Family, school, rugby.
More and more people are becoming aware of the fact that UT Rugby is something worthwhile to experience. People are calling up and saying, my son is interested in coming to UT, and I understand you have a rugby team. Can we talk about it? And getting together with parents and who are actually seeing kids making their college decisions based on the presence of a respectable rugby program.
With the students that we get, that very same player is probably going to be a really good student. And so now they've got to make some choices. Are they going to put law school on hold while they chase the dream to be on the national team? Very seldom do we have that player that is willing to or has the opportunity to do that. Benji Goff is the most recent. Nick Evans is another one that, you know, they kind of curtailed their professional opportunities to a point to where they could go out and test the waters to higher level rugby. You know, we encourage that. We want them to do that, but we can't tell them what's right for them. And so it's a balancing act that they have. We've had many players graduate from here that I thought had the ability to play at the highest level in this country, that basically rugby at Tennessee was their last stop. They moved on, and that's not right or that's not wrong. That's them. You know, so you know, I hope they can give back. Yeah, I know one thing: they enjoyed their rugby while they were here.
When I put on that UT jersey, it's nothing short of an honor. You know, I've met a lot of the guys that played here before me, and I've heard stories of other ones, and I know the culture and the history and the tradition that this program has. And to be named as one of those guys to go out and start a game for the University of Tennessee, that's an honor for me.
Nothing's guaranteed. All these boys come to practice every week. They're coming for your spot. You got to show your coaches what you got every week. You can't take a day off. Like, we get 6 a.m. workouts, 4 practices a week. Like, you got to show up to all of them, give everything you got, because there's people coming for your spot. And when you put on that orange and white jersey on Saturday, it all comes full circle, and it's a great feeling to put it on and run on the field with 14 of your other brothers.
These are first-rate kids. I mean, I'm very, very proud of them. I saw them come in as gangly little freshman boys, and now they're growing into these grand trees, you know, of men. You know, and you know, Jack wants to be an attorney. You know, Carrie's going to go and be a food scientist. They're both doing very well in school. They're outstanding rugby players. Frankly, they have more talent than I ever did. It's really been a joy to watch these kids grow and watch them succeed, and they have succeeded, and I think they will continue to succeed, because the things, as Jack Clark told me once, you know, the things that make you a great, successful rugby player can translate and should translate into the rest of your life, and that's what they're doing, so I'm very proud of them.
It's a badge of honor, you know, to wear your rugby jacket, wear your rugby jersey. So yeah, you know, it gave us some swagger to be rugby players walking around that campus. And you know, you're representing your university. You know, I always thought that was fantastic to be able to say that, yeah, I played rugby at the University of Tennessee. You know, I was on a collegiate team. I mean, that's a big deal.
Man, to put the jersey on for UT Rugby is an honor that I can't explain good enough to the young guys. You know, the tradition that was established here from 1970 on, the guys that come back every year for Old Boys, the people that contribute financially, you know, the alumni are incredibly supportive of the team. You know, they're the backbone of our team. And to put that jersey on and represent everything that this club has established and done is an honor that you really don't appreciate unless you've done it and even moved on past it and looked back on it to see how much that actually did mean to me.
We took pride in saying we were part of UT Rugby. Guys would be like, you know, I'm in a frat, I'm in a fraternity, like, I play rugby. And there's a difference in that. And that was something that stood out. And everyone who was in a frat knew who rugby players were.
To me, the story of UT Rugby, you know, from the beginning, you know, a few guys who had kind of like me, one or two knew what they were doing and the others didn't know what the sport was. So someone with experience brought someone into the fold and they started this group and this club that wanted to play some games and have some fun. And then, you know, the author really is Butch Robertson, you know, who has brought in all of these characters and, you know, given these characters life by, you know, giving them, you know, backgrounds and history and reason to believe in the plot. You know, UT Rugby has now become this well-respected organization. You know, the name is known across the United States. And that organization I'm really, really proud of.
I think I'm most proud of the history of UT Rugby because we always did it what we called the Tennessee way. We had the attitude, well, we want to recruit people that want to play at UT, and if there's any reward involved, it comes later. And that's the whole point of the Sexton Scholarship. And then that's one of the driving points why we started the high school league. We wanted to bring our players up to have respect for the game, respect for the opponent, and be part of the family. We didn't want to transition a player in to play for 2 or 3 years and then go back to South Africa or something. So I think that we did it our way.
50 years ago, you know, in many ways, the Southeast culture and rugby, you know, is a match made in heaven in many ways. You know, it's yeah, I mean, there are some characters whose disposition just entirely suited, you know, the kind of recklessness of rugby to some extent, and I think they found it, you know, an environment in which they could give expression to that, you know, and perhaps just as well, really, because I think otherwise it might have been a sort of let out in law-breaking activity. Mind you, it probably was as well.
The story of UT Rugby is a cornerstone of the eventual success we will have in American rugby. Because while Cal is important and it produces a lot of high-quality players, it's the clubs who don't compete at that level, who have to sell sofas to be able to travel to Albuquerque for national tournaments. That kind of commitment where they may not be national team quality players, but then they go and they coach. They spread rugby. Tennessee Rugby has been more integral to the development of rugby in the American South than any other club. We have maintained a standard to which other clubs can really aspire. There are times when, you know, South Carolina and Georgia, they just hadn't really taken it seriously. And I am so proud to see those teams now really making a commitment. Kentucky, for instance, really coming around. That's fantastic, but Tennessee Rugby being there year in, year out, that was, yeah, that was integral.
Rugby is a sport with a ball and a bunch of good friends. And when the ball's gone, you still have a bunch of good friends.
You know, I've got people that I've known for 40, 45 years. And I said this when my wife passed away. The people during the service, and they were out there, and these were people, and I said it, that have known me at my absolute worst, and yet they still call me a friend. And they still tried to help me through probably one of the most difficult periods in my life. And I so appreciate that, and that's one of the real benefits of the 40, 45 years that I've been a part of UT Rugby.
It was the one thing that helped me feel comfortable, you know, down here, coming from Pennsylvania. You know, you hear the difference between a Yankee and a damn Yankee is and a damn Yankee stays. So, not that I wouldn't want to, but and I might come back. So hey. But it was a comfort level. It was hanging around the guys, and it felt comfortable. And we were out at the bar one night and one weekend, and the rugby guys were there. And I remember this. It was Penn State was playing Alabama, and I was rooting for Penn State. And somebody was starting to give me a hard time, and one of the other rugby guys goes, "Hey, yeah, he may be from the North, but he's with us now, so I got to stick up for him, give him a break." So I thought that was kind of cool too.
There's this awesome part about being a part of the UT team where you meet alumni and you immediately have this mutual understanding about what the culture of the team was like, and you just connect because you know that you're a part of this brotherhood that even though you never stepped on the field with them, you have a bond because of knowing what it was like to play with UT Rugby, what it was like to go to school, what it was like to live in Knoxville.
And so as you become an alumni or an old boy, you find yourself actually living vicariously through some of the other players currently in the program. And for me, I will say as an alumni, I find myself enjoying living vicariously through the current players. And over the years, guys like Scott Jones, Benji Goff, JB, the list goes on, Kevin Hartley. I can go on and on and on with players that for me, I love watching. And admittedly, I love watching them move from very good rugby players to becoming men, to becoming businessmen, to becoming people I do business with. And so I find that refreshing as far as the cohesiveness within the UT Rugby program.
This is the players' club. This is the coaches do an amazing job, and they give so much time and energy and effort, and everyone's thankful for that. But in the end, it's the players' club. It's the students' club.
In most aspects, it hasn't changed at all. It's the same game. There's still only one ball on the field. There's still 15 guys. Now, the substitution stuff has changed over the years. The rules of the game have changed, but the guys haven't changed. And that's why guys want to come back. Because when they come back to our Old Boys weekend or come watch a game, if we're if we go somewhere, if we're in Columbia, South Carolina playing a game, I look over and 2 or 3 old boys are standing on the sideline that happen to live down there, and they always see themselves on the field. These kids that are playing today love each other just as much as the guys in 1970 and 75 and 80 and 85 loved each other. And that's the cool thing about it, right? I mean, you carry that on and you pass that down to the next group, and then they have it, and off you go. You just keep building.
UT Rugby is a way of life. I'll never leave it. It'll always be a part of me, and I'll always go back.
UT Rugby is community.
Family and friendship.
It's important.
Brotherhood.
It's an example of what the game should be.
UT Rugby is one of the most important things that's happened to me in my life outside of, meeting my wife, having my kids, and, my relationship with my friends from rugby. You can't put a price on it.
UT Rugby lasts a lifetime. It lasts a lifetime.
UT Rugby formed my core, and that has served me well in a lot of other arenas other than rugby, because rugby is a passing time, and there are many players, myself and Rob Farley, a lot of players that played well beyond college. But life has more chapters. But what this sport teaches you, if you do it right and you respect it, you will take that with you to every aspect of your life, and it will help you be successful.
UT Rugby is family school rugby. It's our maxim.
If you're not taking care of your family and your faith, then you're not doing what you need to be doing in life. And when you come here, school is what you're going to do and what you should be doing. Because ain't nobody going to pay you to play this game. But when you make that decision to strap on your cleats and step out on that field, then it needs to be UT Rugby.
Putchisms, well, there's no assassins.
Buddy up, saddle up, go.
No quarter given, none asked.
Screwed the pooch.
It's white, it's yay long, and it's got miter written all over it.
Fresh meat.
Mr. Ring, this is not soccer. Do not kick the ball. Pick it up.
We're not going to need a chubby kid with good legs forever.
Throwing the ball around like Mexican party favors.
There's so many of them, but for me, it's Reggie, get your ass up that hill.
On and off the field. I didn't know if you wanted me on the field playing or off the field. Then if we were off the field, I didn't want me to know if you wanted me, we're going to start playing now, or, he was very confusing.
Don't be last.
Finish strong.
Fulton Bottom Hill to me is, it's shitty.
Sucked.
Hard work. I loved it. Fulton Bottoms Hill, the first thing I can think of is pain, carrying people up that hill, but generally pain. Misery.
Broken glass, exposed pieces of concrete, and there's that corner, the one side of the tri-zone that was never safe, but it's the Bottoms. It's the spiritual home of Tennessee rugby.